Hello again, YouTube land. As I promised the other day, I'm recording the second posting about things that I didn't get to in the first one, because even I don't want to listen to me for more than about 15 minutes at a time. So, this one is going to be initially inspired, first half of it anyway, by social media, in the sense that I read some of the posts off of Google+, not a lot of them, because they can get very, very long, but some of them. And one was, not surprisingly, Will Wheaton the other day, who, I want to clarify up front, I am a Trekkie, okay? I do understand the Trekkie level significance of him having played Wesley Crusher. But I have to say, having read a couple of his books and followed Google Plus posts and social media posts like Twitter, I really have developed much more of an affinity for him as a writer, and by extension, as a human being. You know, above and beyond him as an actor. So, one of the posts he put up recently on Google Plus was about the experiences you have reconnecting with children after they go through that I'm a dick to everybody stage. And it stuck in my mind for a couple reasons. One, it's well written. Two, it's a universal experience that I think all of us go through, both as children and eventually as parents. Those of us who choose to become parents, anyway. And also because I read it a few days ago, and at that point, it was maybe 2 days after a conversation I'd had with my mom, who is technically my stepmom. And she and I get along fantastic. We really do. I mean, I call her mom. She's my mom. And part of the conversation was because I was going to a therapy session for several unrelated reasons. And she hadn't been feeling well the week before, so I wanted to call and check up on her. And over the course of that conversation, I was explaining about how much I feel about certain things, or how I feel about certain things, and the problems I've had expressing that in parts of my life. And I mean, the conversations I have with my parents now are very sort of, not circular, but almost, I guess circuitous might be the word, because they go around, but they go way far afield, and then they come back towards the middle, and then they go way far afield, and then they come back towards the middle. So this is one of those conversations. Not surprisingly, it lasted about a half an hour. And I was trying to explain to her about when I was a teenager, when she and my dad first started dating and eventually got married, that it took me the longest time to figure out how to explain to them how I felt about the situation. And I don't know why, but in my head, it was so clear. And for some reason, everything that came out of my mouth that I thought made perfect sense, it came across all wrong. And I know it came across all wrong because their reaction to me when I would say that stuff just made it obvious they didn't understand the point I was trying to get across. And jokingly, my mom, having explained this, my mom says, "Man, I wish I'd known that when you were 15. Because what I was trying to explain to her in the conversation last week is that part of the reason I was so confrontational is that I was being really pushed. I mean, really pushed when they started dating and living together. Because my mother died when I was 16. By the time I was 20, my dad had remarried to my quote-unquote stepmom. So in that 4 years, there was a lot of personal change, personal development going on, a lot of living situation change going on for me. I mean, by 19, I was out in my own apartment, living on my own, working 2 jobs, and attending night school full time. So it was a huge shift of dynamic for the way my life operated. And I realize now, I came off confrontational to her because I was trying to explain and express how much pressure my dad was putting on me at that point. Because the first couple of years they were together, he was just, it was like ridiculous train driving. I mean, it was a jackhammer thing. Like, why don't we do it at, her house? Why don't we have Thanksgiving at her house? Why don't we have Christmas at her house? And I was like, dude, you really, you got to step off. You don't understand how negative you pushing me is getting to be. And at that time, my dad and I were going to family counseling together. I've been in therapy of some form since I was 5, okay? I'm 30. So he and I were going to these sessions, and the therapist I was seeing then, on my own and with my dad, had also treated my mother. So when I started therapy with him, about 5 years worth of stuff, out the window. He knew it. He'd been there, he knew it all, he'd seen it and heard it all from her. Saved a lot of time and really benefited me in the long run, I gotta tell you. And over the course of several sessions, the therapist was able to understand me from experience, and he was able to understand my dad from other experiences more related to my mother. So I was retelling to my mom, my stepmom, one of those experiences where my dad and I had gone and I had tried really hard to explain all this. And finally, I just somehow put together this one sentence, and I said to my therapist, please explain to him that she falls within my protective circle. Now, you know a therapist is really well trained and that you've been working with them a long time when you get the kind of reaction that I got from him when I said that. Because I said the statement, and my therapist, his eyes just lit up, and he went, oh, really? Okay, I get it. And he explained to my dad what my dad had been missing the whole time, is that I'm personally the kind of person, wow, that's redundant. I happen to be the kind of person who takes my family relationships very personally, not the least of which is because of how traumatic my early life was regarding my family. But over the course of the 2 or 3 years up to that therapy session with my dad, he had been jackhammering at me about bonding with her and doing more things with her and involving her, and I was trying to get him to understand, which this one sentence helped me do, that he had to back off, because if I didn't come to it on my own, he was doing himself nothing but harm pushing me, because the worse he pushed me to accept her, the less inclined I was to do it. In large part, I admit now, because I was being very spiteful towards him, because he wasn't acting like he cared about how much I was going through, and he wasn't acting like the fact that it was a difficult transition for me to accept her meant anything to him. All he was acting like was, do it for me, it's important to me, it's all about me, ego. And it was pissing me off. And I was trying to tell him, just let me come to it on my own. I'll get there eventually, but you've got to back the fuck off. And in this one therapy session with this apparently one sentence, I was able to get my therapist to explain it to my dad in as many words, probably more succinctly than I just did, because I ramble. And that was the point where my dad really learned to back off. And that was great, because that was about a year before they got married. I'm sorry, the camera keeps autofocusing. I don't know why. It was about a year before they got married. And by the time they really had been married for about a year or so, is when I went to my stepbrother and my stepsister, who are both older than me. And I said, look, I don't know how much you know about my early life. I don't know what information you've gathered from me or from him. But the fact of the matter is, she's a wonderful person. And she's been nothing but kind and compassionate and loving towards me. And if it doesn't bother you, I'd like to start calling her Mom, just altogether Mom. My stepbrother didn't really care. I mean, he acknowledged that I asked him the question, but it didn't really make a difference to him, which in years since I've learned is because he had several other serious issues going on. My stepsister, my older sister, kind of looked at me and said, you know what? I think I've learned enough about your mother that I kind of understand where that's coming from, but I gotta say, I appreciate that you're asking me, and I respect that you're asking me, and it's perfectly fine with me. So she and I were kind of on the same page about the impetus, which is great because, since then that's been the case. She's my sister. I don't say my stepsister. I say, oh, she's my older sister. And I haven't said stepmom since, except in situations where I'm forced to clarify the technical difference. To my family and to everyone else who knows me, she's just Mom. And that is part of what was going on in this conversation that I had had with her a couple days after I read this Will Wheaton post. And it really made me think about from the growing up child's perspective, because I don't have kids yet, not human kids. I mean, I have my pets who are obviously my babies. But having not had any human children yet, I'm in the position of being the child relating to the parent. And especially in I guess they call them blended families, families with stepchildren and stepparents and all that, it can be an added level of difficulty. I mean, certainly it's not as contentious as it could be. And in the grand wheel of fortune, I landed on a very small but golden space when it comes to my mom and my sister and such. Because not everyone ends up with stepfamily that they like, let alone love, like just family. But I record these off the cuff. I don't script them, and it means that there are these intermittent gaps where I have to pause and let my brain work out exactly what the fuck I'm trying to get across, which is part of how they end up being this long a recording. But yeah, we had that conversation about a week ago, and she said to me, I wish I'd known that when you were 15. And it's true, because all they could really tell was how drastic my behavior was getting, how violent my reactions to things were becoming, and how overall contentious my existence became in regards to them, because I didn't have enough life experience. I mean, I had the capacity. I've always been smart. I've always been wordy. But I didn't have the life capacity to equate what was going on. I didn't have the analytical range to give them any kind of metaphoric reference even, or analogous reference. All I knew was I was trying to get them to back off because they were going to get what they wanted, but they weren't going to get it on their timetable. And that's what Mom had wished she'd known. Since then, I mean, it's been fine. Mom and I never fight. We don't always agree, but we never fight. And as a result, over the last few years, what I've said when anyone's bothered to ask me is I've always embraced the concept that it's nature plus nurture. It's not a competition. And if that's the case, then nature gave me my mother, which directly relates to how I am, who I am, genetics, physical appearance, etc. And to nurture or lack thereof she provided in the first 16 years of my life before she passed away. If that's what nature gave me, then I believe the karmic principle nurtured me beyond that by giving me my stepmom, who is just, my mom. Because anyone genetically capable, physiologically capable, can create offspring, male or female. Anyone who has the equipment can do it. That doesn't make everyone a parent. And it certainly doesn't make everyone a good parent, let alone a great parent. My dad, to my knowledge, is not biologically my father. I have no evidence of that, but that's what's been told to me. But it took me until I was probably, in my mid-20s, 24, 25, before I really accepted the idea that he doesn't have to be my father to be my dad. Because he's been my dad my whole life. It's only in the second half of my life that I knew he wasn't my father. And as I've just explained about my mom, she's not my mother, but she is my mom. And it's significant, especially as I've gotten older, because as a teenager it was very difficult, given the initial trauma my life was. It took me a somewhat prolonged period to get my mind around the idea that anyone cared about me, let alone had any sense of love for me. Aside from my husband, who's done a lot in that respect and makes it clear to me on a very, very frequent basis that he loves me as much as he does, the person who helped me get to the point where I could accept what my husband was telling me when we started dating is my mom. Because she wasn't pushy. She wasn't doing to me what my dad had done. She wasn't saying, you have to accept this, let's do it this way. She was just saying, I'm here. I care. And I'm here. But if that doesn't interest you, I can't make it. So when it does, come find me. And that's one of the biggest things she could have done in her own favor, is she honestly just said, whether or not you engage with me isn't going to change how I feel about you. So if and when, or when and if, you feel the same way, great. And a lot of that, I think, is analogous to this particular story with Will Wheaton and one of his sons, is that he came into it as a step-parent. But they're his kids. They're his boys. As far as he's concerned, they're his sons. That's the end of the statement. And I have to say to myself, that sounds accurate. That sounds a lot like what goes on with me and my mom and my younger sister, who is also not a biological child of our mom. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm rambling. I know I'm rambling, but it's one of those concepts that when you try to express it verbally, there's so much that comes out at once that it gets really difficult to rein in. And if I had tried to write it down, it would have been equally as extensive as this. But I would have stopped and edited and paraphrased and reworded and massaged it so that it was shorter and more concise. But I think some topics, while easily presented as emotional in writing, come off more genuine verbally. There's nothing wrong between one or the other. It's just how I see things. So, that's enough of that ramble. Obviously, I've gone on quite a bit. Broken my own listen to myself for 15 minutes rule, so I'm going to go finish this second cup of coffee for the day and go about doing the other multitude of things I have to do, because my day-to-day life is house spouse, so I'm never for lack of things that need doing. So until the next time I have something to ramble at you,